Chapter 244. The violent explosions continued for a while before the Forbidden Land gradually calmed down. The blazing sun hung in the sky, signifying that the Forbidden Land that had been sealed for 500 years had finally seen the light of day again. Ah, light, this is the light of the sun. The golden dragon, who was covered in wounds, looked up at the blazing sun in the sky and felt the warmth of the sunlight on his scales. He sighed emotionally. As he sighed emotionally, some of the power that he'd lost after entering the Forbidden Land slowly filled his enormous body. The golden dragon's enormous body slowly rose from the ground. The dragon race's ability to fly had finally returned. The power that sealed the entire Forbidden Land has completely disappeared. We're saved. The Cyclops faced the sun with one eye as he lay limply on the ground, riddled with wounds. Although his form was a bit lazy, his green face was filled with the joy of escaping death. On the other side, Dark Dragon Gilbert shook his enormous head. The tears that had just filled his eyes were flung into the air like spring rain. His enormous body floated in the air and flew impatiently towards Han Shuo. He murmured to himself, I just knew that you wouldn't kill your most loyal servant. At this moment, Han Shuo's right hand, which was as tough as steel, had been forcibly broken by his left hand. The meridians in his neck and arms had ruptured, and he lay in a pool of his own blood, gasping for breath. Idiot, if it wasn't for my quick recovery, you would have died even if you had 9 lives. The powerless Han Shuo opened his mouth to berate Gilbert. Blood flowed from the corner of his mouth as soon as he opened his mouth, but Han Shuo didn't seem to feel it at all. His eyes that had regained clarity had a few traces of warmth and emotion. When the strange power that had sealed the entire Forbidden Land disappeared, Dark Dragon Gilbert's body sensed a familiar energy. He slowly took human form as he approached Han Shuo. When he stood in front of Han Shuo, he had already become a haggard human. After experiencing this ordeal, Gilbert's aura had changed slightly. Heh, recover your body first. With his back to Han Shuo, Gilbert wiped away the moisture on his face and walked over in a seemingly relaxed manner. He smiled as he helped Han Shuo up from his limp position, silently standing next to him. Han Shuo chanted a necromancy incantation. A pure white little skull and the dumb earth zombie suddenly appeared in front of Han Shuo. As soon as the two stood in front of Han Shuo, their gazes simultaneously focused on Han Shuo. When they discovered that Han Shuo was in a miserable state and drenched in blood, they both abruptly moved to either side of Han Shuo and anxiously reached out their large hands to scratch his body, as if they wanted to stuff the blood on Han Shuo's body back into his body through his wounds. The little skeleton's purple eyes and the Earth Elite zombie's earthy yellow eyes were both filled with panic. They seemed to have a lot of life in them, waving their hands and feet to express what they were trying to say at such a busy time. Alright. With the strength of my body now, this kind of injury won't be fatal. You don't have to worry about it. Han Shuo could understand the meaning behind the two's frantic and gesticulating explanations. Although their method of trying to stuff Han Shuo's blood back into his body was childish and laughable, it warmed Han Shuo's heart. Suddenly, the little skull shot into the sky, the bone dagger in his hand and the 7 bone spurs in his hands spinning in a whirlpool. An evil, cold, and inhuman-killing intent spread from his body as the 7 bone spurs pierced towards the Cyclops and the golden dragon like 7 rays of blood. At the same time, the earth zombie to Han Shuo's left sank into the ground as if drowning. A wave of earth-shaking tremors came from the depths of the earth beneath the Cyclops and golden dragon. Sharp mounds of earth rose from the ground, and the Cyclops was the first to be affected. He scrambled to dodge. When the little skull and the earth zombie appeared out of thin air and landed on either side of Han Shuo, the Cyclops and golden dragon only glanced at them casually and didn't pay any attention to these low-level necromancers. However, when the two fellows began to make their move, the deterrence and destructive power they caused the 2 colossal beings to be dumbfounded. They simply could not believe what they were seeing. The little skull and the earth zombies' movements were fast, and their attacks were as swift as lightning. When Han Shuo reacted, the two's attacks were already about to land on the heavily injured Cyclops and golden dragon. Hey, damned stupid dragon, are you just here to watch the show? We just helped you. The golden dragon was terrified as he frantically dodged the attacks of the bloody rays. He couldn't help but roar. Although the Cyclops and golden dragon could use their energy to recover, their bodies had long since become weak after a series of torments. In addition, although the little skeleton and Earth elite zombie were small in size, the intimidation they caused was truly frightening. The golden dragon couldn't help but turn pale with fright and cry out in alarm. My honored master, these two fellows did help us just now. I don't think they have any ill intentions. Gilbert heard the golden dragon's roar and remembered their friendship when the three of them had defended against Han Shuo. He couldn't help but try to persuade Han Shuo. I see. You do come back. Han Shuo nodded indifferently and called out to the little skull and the earth zombie. The two reckless fellows, little skull and the earth zombie, immediately retracted their combined attacks when they heard Han Shuo's order. The 7 bloody bone daggers spun once and returned to Little Skull's back in a very short amount of time. The earth mounds that had been shaking the earth mysteriously disappeared one by one. The earth zombie, who had just disappeared to the left of Han Shuo, slowly rose from the earth as if it had floated up from the water. It stood on the left of Han Shuo as if it had never moved. Little Skull and the earth zombie discovered that Han Shuo was riddled with wounds. Gilbert naturally wasn't Han Shuo's enemy, so the two giants that had also clearly experienced a great battle were naturally treated as the culprits. It was understandable that they would attack without waiting for Han Shuo's orders. Actually, even when he had lost his mind, Han Shuo still had a rough understanding of what had happened. It was just that when he'd lost his mind, his existence had still been useful in helping the two enormous beings leave the forbidden area. Now that the restriction on the forbidden area had been lifted, Han Shuo didn't know if they'd have any ill intentions. He'd summoned the two little skeletons and the Earth elite zombie entirely to guard against any strange movements from the two. Although the little skeleton and the Earth elite zombie's sudden attack was a bit out of Han Shuo's expectations, he felt that letting the two display their strength would be able to intimidate the two enormous beings and prevent them from making any more untoward moves. Therefore, he waited for Gilbert's explanation before stopping the two little fellows' attack. This was also a warning to the two giants that they shouldn't think that they were the rulers now that the restriction of the Forbidden Land had been lifted. The golden dragon, who had hastily transformed into his dragon form to reduce the size of his attack in the face of the little skull's bone spikes, wiped away the cold sweat on his forehead and laughed dryly at Han Shuo from afar. It's very nice to meet you, powerful human. I think there's nothing for me to do now, so let's meet again. As soon as he finished speaking, the golden dragon transformed into a large man and quickly flew out as if he was fleeing. With a few quick movements, he landed in a patch of rocks and disappeared without a trace. As soon as the golden dragon left, the Cyclops also looked up at the sky and cried out like thunder, I'm also very happy to meet you guys, but I still have some matters to attend to at home, so I won't be able to chat with you guys any longer. I hope we'll have the chance to meet again. The sound of thunder was still ringing in the sky, and the Cyclops didn't even have time to rest. He'd already twisted his injured body and staggered into the distance, hoping that he wouldn't run into this crazy human next time. His appearance when he went berserk was simply too frightening. In the blink of an eye, the two exhausted and injured giants had fled the area with terrified expressions. Han Shuo and Gilbert looked at each other, feeling that this was truly absurd. Whether it was the Cyclops or the Golden Dragon, they were both terrifying existences at their peak if they hadn't experienced a series of battles. In the dark forest, unless they encountered a level 4 creature like the Lord of the Flames, they would be able to do as they pleased. Level 1 magical creatures like the Manticore and the Medusa would all avoid the Cyclops or the Golden Dragon as if they'd seen a ghost. However, such a powerful existence had fled right in front of them. This filled Han Shuo and Gilbert's hearts with a strange feeling. Discarding some chaotic thoughts, Han Shuo sat down cross-legged and said to Gilbert, Little Skull, and the Earth Elite Zombie, I'm going to heal, you guys keep an eye on me. Afterwards, a murderous aura wrapped around his body and formed a black and red cocoon, wrapping him up tightly. Bolts of black and red light flowed on the surface of the cocoon like lightning, tightly wrapping Han Shua's aura within, not letting a single bit leak out. The fiendish existences that had always existed in the forbidden area were what demonic cultivators called fiends. They were strange existences that were formed after the souls of the strong were imprisoned in a special space after death. Because they couldn't disappear from the world, they gradually absorbed all sorts of chaotic energies over time. No one knew what had happened 500 years ago, but there must have been many strong souls that had been affected by the strange energy in the forbidden area and hadn't been able to disappear from the world for 500 years. All the creatures that had mistakenly entered the forbidden area had their abilities sealed by the power of the forbidden area. They were unable to use fighting aura or magic to harm the fiends, and the fiends had no reaction to physical damage. Therefore, no matter how strong a creature was, only death awaited them when faced with the fiends in this area. Before these creatures died, their fear, despair, unwillingness, and other negative emotions were all absorbed by the fiends that had existed first. This caused the fiends to accumulate more and more energy over the 500 years, becoming more and more savage and powerful. The intruders that only had physical attacks were naturally unable to deal with these fiends. However, Han Shua, who had entered the bloodlust realm due to his demonic cultivation, was surrounded by a fiendish aura. His demon's lair edge, which was linked to his life, was the bane of these fiends. Therefore, when Han Shua learned that these existences were fiends, he immediately used the demon infant and the demon's lair edge to form a whirlpool, creating a frenzied devouring device that absorbed all the fiends that had existed in the forbidden area for 500 years into the demon infant and the demon's lair edge. During this process, the image of a giant appeared behind Han Shua's back. The demonic infant had absorbed too much killing intent and naturally formed this giant image. In the end, all of it was absorbed into Han Shua's body. However, although the power of this fiends was enormous, they were filled with too many impure thoughts. All sorts of negative emotions interweaved together, and each fiend had a different characteristic. This caused Han Shua, whose mind was already unstable in the bloodlust realm, to finally lose his mind and almost become a bloodthirsty demon. After passing through the bloodlust realm, Han Shua used the battle with the three enormous beings to vent the chaotic fiends that had surrounded his body through his attacks. During this process, the chaotic fiends underwent refinement, and a small portion of the purest energy was absorbed by the demon infant by Han Shua. The other portion of the impure, negative, and violent fiends was absorbed by the demon's lair edge because it was filled with impurities and had too many chaotic emotions. Most of the killing intent that couldn't be absorbed was consumed by Han Shua's irrational venting. It was consumed by the attacks of the three enormous beings. Finally, the demon's lair edge's earth-shattering blow blasted into the void that was shrouded in black mist. This enormous, but fatal, manic energy actually destroyed the imprisonment energy that enveloped the entire Forbidden Land, allowing it to see the light of day once more. The reason why Han Shua had previously possessed the tyrannical strength to match the three enormous beings and the reason why the demon's lair edge was able to possess such overwhelming power was because it had continuously consumed a large portion of the chaotic, violent, and uncontrollable fiends' killing intent. That energy only possessed the purest form of destructive energy and wasn't something that he could control at all. Therefore, he had made it disappear through venting. Therefore, the strength that Han Shua and the demon's lair edge had just displayed wasn't something that they should possess. When the demon's lair edge had pierced through the 500-year imprisonment of the forbidden area, all of the destructive energy had completely disappeared. Han Shua and the demon's lair edge had also returned to their original form in an instant, without the support of the frenzied energy from before. However, this time, both Han Shua and the demon's lair edge had indeed obtained great benefits. Although Han Shua was still in the bloodlust realm, the purest energy within the demon infant had caused Han Shua's strength to skyrocket once again. After the demon's lair edge had absorbed a portion of the energy, it was very likely that after a period of refinement and some special opportunities, it would truly be able to condense all sorts of chaotic negative emotions and form a soul unique to the demon's lair edge. At that time, the demon's lair edge would truly possess the power of a peerless weapon. Han Shuo, who had been wrapped in the black and red cocoon, only broke out after 8 days and 9 nights. His shattered right arm had returned to normal, and the ruptured veins on his neck and arms had become even more resilient. His height had actually increased by a few centimeters. His naked body was now tall and sturdy, with broad shoulders and a thin waist. The muscles on his body were well-proportioned and firm, like pieces of finely carved rock. His eyes were deep and sinister, filled with the confidence of being in control of everything. "Great Master, you finally come out. Your pitiful servant has waited for far too long." Gilbert had a dejected expression as he stood pitifully by Han Shuo's side, loudly calling out Han Shuo's greatness. Looking at Gilbert in shock, Han Shuo asked in bewilderment, "What's wrong? Why are you pitiful now?" Gilbert had a pitiful expression as he first looked around, then complained like a villain, "Not only did those two bully me, they even dug up someone's ancestral grave. They're too evil." Han Shuo was taken aback when he heard this. He asked in astonishment, "What's going on?" "Look for yourself, look at what they've done. They even made me, the great dark dragon Gilbert, help them dig up someone's ancestral grave. I wouldn't do it, and they actually threatened me with a knife. They're too evil, too shameless, that detestable little skull." Gilbert felt extremely wronged. He pulled Han Shuo up into the sky, letting Han Shuo see the evil deeds of Little Skull and the Earth Elite Zombie. When Han Shuo floated up into the sky and looked towards Ermite Cotton's tombstone, he was dumbfounded by what he saw. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he said, those two really went a bit too far." Chapter 245. The flat ground was now covered in ravines. With the tombstone of Ermite Cotton, a demigod of the Lancelot Empire, as the center, the land within a few dozen meters of it had been turned upside down. Many crooked ravines appeared out of thin air. It was as if a large-scale archaeological team was excavating antiques. The entire area had been turned upside down. As far as the eye could see, the brown soil had piled up into mounds. In an enormous ravine below, the little skeleton and the Earth Elite Zombie were surrounding an enormous skeleton, dismantling it. The skeleton was more than 10 meters long, and every bone was as thick as a person. They sparkled like jade and sparkled with pure white light. It was obviously the skeleton of a super-rank magical beast. Sensing Han Shuo's presence, Little Skull and the Earth Elite Zombie grabbed a few bone spurs that were even bigger than themselves and waved them at Han Shuo excitedly, as if they were greeting Han Shuo. After that, the little skeleton picked up the bones in his hands and flew to a deep pit with white bones in a flash. He carefully threw the bones he had dismantled into the deep pit, acting as if they were very precious. What have they been doing these past few days?" Han Shuo asked Gilbert in surprise as he watched from the sky. With a sad face, Gilbert complained, "Not long after you were wrapped up like a worm in a cocoon, these two fellows became restless." Little Zombie went into the ground, grabbed a bone, and proudly showed it off to Little Skull. Then Little Skull also became excited. When these two fellows work together, they are simply the most powerful grave robbers. They turn the entire area upside down, as if to collect these bones. I don't know what they are planning to do. While listening to Gilbert's description, Han Shuo stared at the deep pit where the white bones were placed. His body that was standing in the air slowly moved towards the deep pit. He landed in the deep pit from the sky, grabbed a leg bone of an unknown magical beast, and began to carefully examine it. The bone was very heavy in his hand. It actually weighed more than 50 kilograms. The white bone seemed to contain a strange aura. The bone felt cold to the touch, and a fierce aura flowed into Han Shuo's body through the white bone. Under Han Shuo's feet, the Earth Elite Zombie silently rose from the ground like a ghost of the earth. He held a piece of white bone in his hand and presented it to Han Shuo as if he was presenting a treasure. His earthy yellow eyes shone with a proud light. Stunned, Han Shuo picked up the piece of white bone that the Earth Elite Zombie handed to him. Han Shuo felt an ancient dragon aura through this piece of bone. This bone was only as thick as an arm, but it was a bit heavier than the previous one. There was a faint whistling sound of wind coming from this piece of white bone. If one were to carefully feel it, they would be able to feel that this piece of white bone contained the element of wind magic. Han Shuo was certain that this piece of white bone must have come from the body of a wind dragon. As a necromancy mage, Han Shuo had some understanding of the skeletons of some magical beasts. He also understood that necromancy mages needed to use skeletons for magical experiments. Some of the skeletons of super-rank magical beasts even contained a portion of their energy when they were alive. These skeletons could even be used to make some powerful weapons. For example, the white bone staff that Belinda of the Calamity Church had refined was forged from the skeleton of a super-rank magical beast. It had the effect of amplifying some of Han Shuo's necromancy magic. Just as Han Shuo was pondering inwardly, as if he wanted to prove something to Han Shuo, the little skull appeared in front of Han Shuo with a few other bones. He suddenly pulled on Han Shuo's sleeve, making Han Shuo focus his attention on him. When Han Shuo looked at the little skull with astonishment, he discovered that the little skull's purple demon eye was glistening with a strange light. Ripples of silver light suddenly circulated in the little skull's left claw that held a piece of white bone. The originally sparkling and translucent bone rapidly weathered in the little skull's left claw. It was as if the gears of time had been sped up 1,000 times. In an extremely short amount of time, the piece of white bone that had originally contained a strange power had been reduced to dust and scattered on the ground. Afterwards, the little skull raised his head proudly and picked up another piece of white bone, making a chewing motion towards Han Shuo. He then casually tossed the piece of white bone into the pile of bones around him. Without the little skull's further explanation, Han Shuo already understood that the little skull and the Earth elite zombie had the ability to absorb the bones of some of the powerful creatures in this forbidden area. Perhaps it was because the forbidden area had always had a restraining power, but not only were the souls of these powerful creatures unable to dissipate into the world, their bodies also contained a portion of the energy they had when they were alive. Although their bodies had completely rotted away, their bones still contained an abnormal amount of energy. It just so happened that this energy was a great tonic for the little skull and the Earth elite zombie. No wonder the two of them had become grave robbers and turned this area upside down. Han Shuo smiled as he rubbed the little skull's smooth skull and patted the Earth elite zombie's shoulder. He said gently, "Hee, well done. In that case, you guys can collect all the bones that can be used here." After the Earth elite zombie was praised by Han Shuo, he foolishly rubbed his head and his body sank back into the ground. After a while, he appeared at the skeleton that was more than 10 meters tall and began to dismantle the bones again. Little Skeleton, on the other hand, was dancing with joy as he delightfully sent Han Shuo one message after another, describing his thoughts. After listening attentively for a while, Han Shuo nodded and expressed his understanding. "If you want to take these bones away with you and the Earth elite zombie, that's not a problem. I'll help you after you've piled up all the bones." In the message that the little skull sent, he wanted to bring all the bones with strange powers into the different dimension he was in. It seemed that he wanted to benefit more of the undead creatures that belonged to them. After understanding his thoughts, Han Shuo was first surprised, but then immediately expressed his understanding. After getting Han Shuo's approval, the little skull was very excited. After the 7 bone spurs shook for a while, he flew into the air and landed in the direction of the Earth elite zombie. He started working with the Earth elite zombie and continued to dismantle the bones of the huge magical beast. Han Shuo observed for a moment and discovered that they didn't want the entire skeleton of a super-rank creature. Based on their ability to sense the energy contained in the skeleton, they only dismantled the bones that contained energy. The ordinary and useless bones were casually tossed to the side. The dozen or so ravines in the area were littered with useless bones that had been carelessly tossed to the side. It looked like they hadn't been idle during the past few days while Han Shuo had been training. That 10-meter-long skeleton of a giant beast seemed to be their last prey. While the little skull and the Earth elite zombie were working, Han Shuo's eyes wandered around. Then, a tombstone engraved with Ermite Cotton's name attracted Han Shuo's attention. It was only now that Han Shuo realized that the tombstone of this eternal legend of Lancelot was originally only a small part of it. Now that the Earth elite zombie had dug up the surrounding gullies, The tombstone that was originally only a meter tall had grown to a height of 3 meters. From the top of the tombstone to the bottom, the tombstone that was buried deep in the earth grew wider and wider until it looked like a miniature mountain. This made Han Shuo feel very strange. Seeing that Han Shuo's attention was on Mike Cotton's tombstone, Dark Dragon Gilbert seemed to have thought of something. He suddenly opened his mouth and said, "Master, there's something strange about this large stone slab. Little Skull and the little zombie once asked me to move this stone slab, but I tried and found that this stone slab is very, very heavy. Even with my strength, I couldn't move it at all." "Oh, that's a bit interesting." As a member of the dragon race, Dark Dragon Gilbert still possessed tyrannical strength even in human form. Even if the tombstone was twice as large, with Dark Dragon Gilbert's strength, it was impossible for him to not move it at all. This made Han Shuo very surprised. Therefore, as soon as Gilbert finished speaking, Han Shuo had already flown to the front of the tombstone and reached out to touch the tombstone with a surprised expression. The tombstone was cold to the touch. Other than the few deep scratches where Mike Cotton's name was engraved, the rest of the tombstone was as smooth as a mirror. After reaching out to touch it, Han Shuo didn't feel anything strange or uncomfortable. It wasn't much different from an ordinary stone slab. Taking a deep breath, Han Shuo pushed and shook the tombstone with all his might. He discovered that the tombstone didn't budge at all. It looked like this tombstone was as heavy as Gilbert had said, and it wasn't something that could be easily shaken. "Come here, dig this piece of land for me." With a thought, Han Shuo waved his hand at the Earth Elite Zombie in the distance. The two undead creatures, Little Skull and the Earth Elite Zombie, were only interested in the bones that were useful to them. This tombstone shouldn't be too attractive to them. Otherwise, with the Earth Elite Zombie's ability, it would have long turned the ground under the tombstone upside down. Under Han Shuo's command, the Earth Elite Zombie disappeared into the ground in the distance. Then, the ground under Han Shuo's feet shook. The ground that was buried deep under the tombstone began to roll like sand. The soft ground shook for a while, and two cracks abruptly separated from the bottom of the tombstone. The originally towering tombstone suddenly collapsed on a raised hill. The tombstone that was 7 meters in length was completely exposed. Even the bottom of the tombstone, which was as wide as a tree root, was exposed. That damn zombie. He clearly had the ability to move it, but he let me, the great Gilbert, help him move it. What a lazy bastard. Gilbert watched as the Earth Elite Zombie, under Han Shuo's command, effortlessly uprooted the tombstone. He couldn't help but complain when he thought of his previous experience. Unfortunately, the Earth Elite Zombie simply ignored Gilbert's clamor. After completing what Han Shuo had ordered, it appeared next to Little Skull a few dozen meters away and continued to concentrate on dismantling the huge skeleton. "Honorable Master, what are you trying to do?" Gilbert looked at the completely exposed tombstone and asked in confusion. "Let's take a look first." Han Shuo answered casually. He approached the tombstone and carefully observed it. His fingers lightly moved on the tombstone, his face pensive. A normal tombstone would never be 7 meters long. Furthermore, he didn't know what material this tombstone was made of. Even with Han Shuo's current understanding of various ores, he couldn't tell what material this tombstone was made of. In addition, its weight was beyond Han Shuo's imagination. Han Shuo couldn't help but feel a little puzzled. As his fingers lightly moved across the tombstone, a wisp of magical yuan appeared on his fingertip like static electricity. After being pressed down by Han Shuo, it fell into the tombstone. An enormous amount of dark element was suddenly transmitted to Han Shuo's mind through the magical yuan. This energy was surprisingly similar to the energy that imprisoned the entire Forbidden Land. Startled, Han Shuo hurriedly retracted his finger and looked at the brown tombstone in amazement. He murmured, "Strange, this energy should have already disappeared. Could it be that the strange energy that enveloped the entire Forbidden Land came from the demigod existence Mike Cotton? What is it, Master?" The little dark dragon, Gilbert, didn't hear Han Shuo's murmurs clearly and couldn't help but ask when he saw the surprise on Han Shuo's face. Taking a few steps back, Han Shuo instructed, "Gilbert, step back a bit." I'm going to blast this tombstone open and see what's inside. When Gilbert left as instructed, Han Shuo also stepped back about 10 meters and summoned the Demon's Lair Edge, infusing it with magical yuan. Although the Demon's Lair Edge hadn't truly become a peerless weapon after absorbing a large amount of killing intent, the killing intent contained within it already possessed a frightening amount of power. With Han Shuo's magical yuan infusing it, a sharp light shot out from the Demon's Lair Edge like a waterfall, shooting towards the tombstone with terrifying power. A series of crackling sounds rang out, accompanied by a brilliant flash of light. The sturdy stone wall shattered into pieces under the impact of the indestructible Demon's Lair Edge. Stone fragments flew everywhere. When everything had calmed down, the brown stones were scattered all over the ground. On the mound that supported the tombstone was a magic staff embedded with 3 purple crystals and emanating a dense element of dark, as well as an ancient handwritten notebook. Chapter 246. He didn't know what material the staff was made of. It was grayish-brown in color and looked a bit rough to the touch. The staff was about 1 meter long and had a rhombus shape at the top. The 3 amethyst crystals were the size of a palm and were bright and beautiful. The sparkling light within the amethyst rippled like flowing water. At first glance, the 3 amethysts looked like 3 miniature pools, inlaid in a triangular shape. There was also an ancient handwritten notebook with dense, ancient magical characters that looked like tadpoles. These 2 items were actually embedded in the tombstone and looked very precious. They might have come from Ermite Cotton's relic. Han Shuo picked them up and examined them carefully, then unceremoniously stored the 2 items into his space ring. His gaze then shifted to the side and saw that the rocks on the shattered tombstone were all different colors. He couldn't help but pick one up in surprise and examine it closely. Oh, Scarlheart iron and white light silver. Who would have thought that the tombstone would be made from such peculiar ores? No wonder I couldn't tell what material it was made of. Han Shuo exclaimed softly and picked up some of the shattered rocks to distinguish them in his hands. The outside of the tombstone was made from several peculiar ores. However, when the Demon's Lair Edge had shattered the tombstone, the ores inside hadn't been completely melted. Many of the rocks were still raw ores. Judging from the magic staff and handwritten notebook hidden inside, it wasn't that the person who smelted the tombstone wasn't lacking in skill. He must have been afraid that the 2 items inside would be damaged if he completely smelted them. Chapter 247. With Han Shuo's current strength, not to mention a character like Philide, Han Shuo wouldn't even be a match for the Dean of the Dark Major, Archmage Dao. Han Shuo strode over with a relaxed expression. A calm smile hung on his face, giving off an awe-inspiring aura. "Brian, you're finally back?" Lisa's voice was filled with joy and surprise. She couldn't help but jump up in excitement and exclaim, "Yeah." When Fanny, who was sitting on the high platform, saw Han Shuo, the trace of gloom that had lingered on her face for the past few months seemed to have been wiped away by an invisible hand. Her entire being blossomed with a dazzling radiance as the corners of her mouth curved in a strange arc that seemed both happy and angry. Han Shuo had experienced a series of life and death battles in the past half a year, and his strength had skyrocketed nonstop. After becoming accustomed to grand occasions, his entire body naturally exuded an inexplicable aura. Even if he didn't purposefully display his strength, no one would dare underestimate him. "Athena, focus on the test. I think you'll be able to do it," Han Shuo said with a smile to Athena, who had become nervous from the mockery and sarcasm of Philide and the others, after walking over. "Thank you, Brian." Han Shuo's arrival was like a reassurance pill, causing Athena's uneasy heart to slowly calm down. Philide, who had been infuriated by Han Shuo's first sentence, had an ugly expression on his face. He stared darkly at Han Shuo and said, "If you weren't hiding from me, why did you disappear for half a year after my body recovered?" To be honest, Han Shuo really felt that a character like Philide was a bit boring. After experiencing so many battles with the strong, such a character really didn't have the right to make a fuss. The gap between the two was just too great, to the point that Han Shuo couldn't even muster the interest to deal with him. "Ha!" Han Shuo let out a strange laugh and glanced at Fred from the corner of his eyes. He shook his head sympathetically and spread out his hands with a sigh. You really are a person who thinks too highly of himself. What can I say to an idiot like you who has mental problems? After he finished speaking, Han Shuo no longer looked at Fred, who was trembling with anger. He turned to Fanny on the stage and took a deep breath. He looked deeply at Fanny and said, I'm back. For no reason at all, Fanny's pretty face turned red. Then, as if she wanted to hide her true feelings, Fanny fiercely glared at Han Shuo and said angrily, You bastard, you still know to go back to school? Chuckling awkwardly, Han Shuo was about to explain something when Dean Dao of the Dark Major said in a low voice with an unhappy expression, If you want to catch up, you'll have plenty of time after the exams. I think you should hurry up and finish up your major's business. We're very busy. After Dao's words, the teachers of the Dark Major also rushed Fanny and Jean, expressing that they had many things to do and couldn't wait any longer. Han Shuo, who'd been about to explain, spread out his hands apologetically towards Fanny on the stage. He then shrugged and took a few steps back, standing together with Lisa, Amy, and a few other necromancy students. He didn't say anything else. Brian, where have you been for the past half year? Didn't you say that you'd be returning to Asen City soon? Why have you dragged it out until now? Lisa chattered incessantly as soon as Han Shuo came over. Han Shuo waited for her to finish her string of questions before smiling and saying that he'd gone to the dark forest to train for a period of time. Who does he think he is? He really thinks he's something. One of the Dark Major students that had been taken down by Han Shuo looked at Han Shuo's confident figure and couldn't help but snort angrily. I'd like to see how he plans on graduating early. I remember that he was only a novice mage half a year ago. Fred had been repeatedly provoked by Han Shuo, and his face darkened as he looked at Han Shuo, who was chatting cheerfully and wittily, and said coldly. This time, Athena was calm enough and wasn't as nervous as the last time. She cast a few necromancy spells very skillfully and answered a few questions very smoothly. She passed the beginner mage's trial very easily. After that, some of the necromancy students began their tests one by one. Most of the necromancy students' strength hadn't changed much, but Lisa had actually become a journeyman mage. The magical undulations in her body were noticeably stronger than the other students. After experiencing the tragic changes in her life, Lisa had suddenly become much more sensible and understood the importance of strength. She was much more diligent in training magic than before and didn't spend as much time playing around as before. She spent less time meditating and training. When all the necromancy students had finished their tests, Han Shuo finally walked out calmly and said, I'm planning on graduating directly after coming back this time. Can I take the test now? In the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force, one would be considered to have graduated as long as they could advance to Adept Mage. Han Shuo had obtained the memories of Archmage Necromancer Clarendon's soul. After this period of training, he had long since grasped all the adept magics of the necromancy major, as well as a few lost magics of necromancy. The magic test was divided into 3 stages. The first stage was to answer some questions about magic, the second stage was to cast a spell of a certain level, and the third stage was to be assigned a mission for the student to complete using the knowledge they'd learned. That was the end of the test. However, within the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force, those below the Adept Mage level didn't need to complete any missions. They only needed to pass the first 2 tests. With Han Shuo's current knowledge and strength in necromancy, the Adept Mage test was child's play. Han Shuo had even arrogantly skipped the Journeyman Mage test and set his sights on the Adept Mage level, planning on leaving the shackles of the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force as soon as possible. Are you sure you want to skip the Adept Mage test? Dao glared darkly at Han Shuo from atop the round table and confirmed once again. Nodding his head impatiently, Han Shuo said with certainty, Mr. Dao, am I not clear enough? I want to skip the Journeyman Mage test and advance directly to Adept Mage? All right then, we can begin. Dao snorted coldly, obviously a bit repulsed by Han Shuo's impolite words. He nodded at Fanny and Jean, expressing his agreement. Under the astonishment of the necromancy major students, Han Shuo walked onto the round table and calmly dealt with Fanny and Jean's answers. He then asked Dao and a few other dark mages about some related magical knowledge. Dao and the others purposefully made things difficult for Han Shuo and specifically asked him some tricky and cryptic magical knowledge. However, Han Shuo, who'd received Clarendon's memories, could be considered an archmage who'd been tempered, if mental strength wasn't included. These seemingly difficult questions obviously didn't stump Han Shuo, and Han Shuo smoothly answered all of them with narrowed eyes and a smile. With this, the necromancy major students below immediately began to exhale and exhale. Lisa was even more excited as she chattered and mocked Philide, using Han Shuo's performance to provoke Philide and the others' earlier mockery. Although Dao was very unwilling to admit it, Han Shuo's answers were watertight. When they asked some difficult magical knowledge, Han Shuo smoothly and accurately answered all of them. Even if they wanted to find fault with him, they had no excuse. In the end, they could only keep a straight face and accept the first test. The second test, which showcased necromancy magic, was even easier. The spells that Han Shuo had used dozens of times were released with practiced ease. With the support of sufficient mental strength and Clarendon's decades of experience in magic, the release of advanced necromancy magic posed no difficulty to Han Shuo at all. When Han Shuo released all of the advanced necromancy magic one after another, the necromancy major students below cheered excitedly. In contrast, the dark major's teachers and students had ugly expressions on their faces. It was obvious that they hadn't expected that Han Shuo would be able to skip a level and directly reach the level of an adept mage in the short span of half a year. Brian, I didn't misjudge you. You are indeed a magical genius. Fanny, who was on the stage, watched as Han Shuo easily dealt with everything from beginning to end. The strength that he displayed wasn't the slightest bit inferior to Fanny's own. The precision with which he released some of the spells was even more adept than his teacher. This made Fanny exclaim in surprise. What kind of world is this? He's obtained this kind of strength so quickly. Jean murmured to himself and also had a look of disbelief on his face. He then thought, although Han Shuo hadn't attended many of his classes, he was still his student. He had more or less contributed to having such a miraculous student. This was enough for him to brag about in the future. Jean was overjoyed when he thought of this. You passed. Dao snorted coldly, his expression becoming uglier and uglier. Heh, many thanks to Mr. Dao. Han Shuo had a smile on his face from beginning to end. Whether it was answering questions about magical knowledge or casting necromancy magic, he appeared to be so relaxed and casual, without the slightest bit of reluctance. With a darkened face, Dao and the dark major teachers lowered their heads and discussed for a while. Dao chuckled coldly and lifted his head to look at Han Shuo. You've passed the first two tests. Your performance is very surprising. Then I'll tell you the third test directly. As long as you can kill a level 3 harpy by yourself within a month and hand over its core to us, you'll pass the test. Oh my gosh, how is that possible? The necromancy major students immediately started complaining. During the last trip to the Dark Forest, Odysseus' team of 6 had been on their guard against a harpy, deathly afraid that something would go wrong. Odysseus' team of 6, including 6 adept mages and adept swordsmen, as well as the journeyman swordsman and archer Nia, had all been so cautious. This spoke volumes of how frightening a harpy was. This time, the Dark Mage's Dao had actually directly asked Han Shuo to kill a harpy as a stepping stone for adept mages to advance. He was obviously purposefully making things difficult for Han Shuo. Philide and the other Dark Major students all shut their mouths after witnessing Han Shuo's performance in the second stage. Even Philide, who had been brimming with confidence, was so nervous that he didn't dare say anything more after seeing Han Shuo easily cast adept magic one after another. Just as they felt their morale being suppressed, they all grew excited again when they heard that Dao had actually asked Han Shuo to hunt a level 3 harpy. They couldn't help but grin and laugh heartily, looking at Han Shuo and the others with schadenfreude. Mr. Dao, don't you think this is a bit too much? I've never heard of anyone asking students to hunt a harpy for the advancement of adept mages in the Dark Major. This is a mission that sends people to their deaths. I absolutely won't agree to it. Fanny's beautiful face was flushed red from anger as she glared at Dao and shouted. Snorting coldly, Dao's expression darkened as he said, Master Fanny, remember, I'm the Dean of the Dark Major. Your necromancy major belongs to the Dark Major. I have the right to do this. If student Brian isn't willing to accept this test, he can very well give up. But this way, the first 2 rounds of tests will be for naught. By now, Dao had made it clear that he was making things difficult for Han Shuo. Anyone could see that. Fanny's body trembled with anger when she heard these words. She pointed at Dao and said, You're actually such a despicable person. I'll go find the dean to reason things out. I won't allow you to cover the sky with one hand. Wait. Han Shuo still had a smile on his face as he spoke unhurriedly. When everyone's gazes were on him, Han Shuo finally stared at Dao and said merrily, Mr. Dao, are you sure you want me to hunt a harpy? Haha, I'm sure. As long as you can prove that you have the strength to do so, I will immediately confirm that you have successfully advanced this time. I will absolutely not say anything else. Dao finally felt refreshed and said to Han Shuo with a smile. Nodding, Han Shuo shrugged his shoulders and said with a smile, Then, it looks like I don't need to make a trip back to the Dark Forest. Please help me confirm my rank. Han Shuo's space ring lit up as soon as he'd finished speaking. 2 harpy cores appeared in his left hand and a pair of dark iron claws appeared in his right hand, also from a harpy. I hunted these 2 harpies in the Dark Forest before I returned to the academy. There are still traces of my necromancy magic on these iron claws. I think Mr. Dao won't deny it. Han Shuo looked at the flabbergasted Dao with a supercilious smile and chuckled. Suddenly, the space in front of Han Shuo twisted as a beam of light flashed past. Dean Emma of the Academy of Magic and Force appeared out of thin air and landed a spell on the 2 harpies' iron claws in Han Shuo's hands. Emma smiled benevolently. That's right, I can confirm that these 2 harpies were indeed killed by Brian. Pausing, Emma first swept an odd glance at Han Shuo and then smiled at Dao, saying harmoniously, There shouldn't be any problems, I think he really can graduate. Chapter 248. Dao's face was as ugly as it could be. No matter how highly he'd overestimated Han Shuo, he'd never have guessed that Han Shuo's current strength was already so ridiculously frightening. Killing 2 harpies by himself was something that even Dior himself might not be able to do. Dao had nothing else to say after Dean Emma's confirmation. With so many people looking at him, he couldn't deny it even if he wanted to. He could only nod indignantly in the end and say to Emma, Since the Honorable Dean has personally confirmed it, then Brian will officially graduate. Dao snorted darkly after he'd finished speaking. He gave a few instructions to a dark major teacher beside him and strode away. It looked like he wasn't in a good mood. The necromancy major students finally awoke from their shock after Dao left. They couldn't help but cry out in happiness after Lisa's cheers. Philide and the other dark major students didn't utter another word of bullshit as they slipped away with their tails between their legs. How is this possible? How is this possible? Fanny muttered to herself and looked incredulously at Han Shuo. She couldn't figure out how Han Shuo could kill 2 harpies by himself. Fanny had a feeling that Han Shuo's current strength was unfathomable. Fanny then suddenly remembered her promise with Han Shuo. Fanny had once said that as long as Brian advanced to Adept Mage, she could consider dating him. Now that half a year had passed, Han Shuo had suddenly descended upon the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force and successfully accomplished this feat with a calm and unruffled demeanor. With Fanny's understanding of Han Shuo, she knew that he would definitely mention this matter. Therefore, the unprepared Fanny's heart was in a mess. She blushed and looked at Han Shuo from afar, only to discover that Han Shuo was looking at her with a burning gaze. This made Fanny even more frantic. She hastily gave some instructions to Jean beside her and quickly disappeared as if she was fleeing. Han Shuo immediately knew what was going on when he saw Fanny leave. He chuckled lowly, pleased with himself, and didn't pay attention to the praises of Lisa and the other students beside him, planning to chase after Fanny's footsteps. Brian, I have some matters to discuss with you alone. Come with me. Don't worry about your graduation qualifications, there shouldn't be any problems. Dean Emma smiled merrily when she saw that Han Shuo was about to leave. Han Shuo started slightly, a bit unsure of Emma's intentions. He thought to himself that the matter with Fanny wasn't urgent, so he nodded and agreed. He said a few words to Lisa and the others before following Dean Emma towards her office. Han Shuo arrived at Emma's office after a while and found a seat without any reservations. Han Shuo said with a smile, "Honored Dean, what business do you have with me?" Haha, if I remember correctly, you shouldn't be over 18 years old right now. However, you're now an adept necromancer, and you even have the strength to kill a harpy. It's a bit inconceivable that you've gone from a child without any magical element to such heights in just a short year. Emma looked at Han Shuo with a smile and spoke unhurriedly. Han Shuo couldn't help but frown when he heard Emma's words. He was silent for a while before smiling faintly. Indeed, even I feel that it's inconceivable. What does the honored dean mean by these words? Shaking her head, Emma chuckled and said benevolently, "Child, don't overthink things. I don't have any ill intentions towards you. It's just that you're a student of my Babylon Academy of Magic and Force, and you're studying necromancy magic. You've brought glory to our academy now that you've achieved so much. Haha, I have to say that it's a miracle that you've gone from a child who knows nothing to someone who has the ability to kill 2 harpies in 2 years. What I can be sure of is that you must have encountered some strange events in these 2 years. Otherwise, it would be impossible for you to have such rapid progress. You haven't reported to the Dark Mantle in a long time. Candide once told me to pay attention and told you to make a trip to the Dark Mantle as soon as possible if you return to the academy. He seems to have a mission for you. In addition, I hope that you can properly handle your relationship with Fanny. There are some things that I can't say, but I'll just remind you that Fanny's father isn't easy to get along with. Be careful." Han Shuo breathed a sigh of relief after Emma's words. He hadn't thought that Emma would be a bit similar to Candide. He didn't know if it was because they were husband and wife, but she actually didn't show any ruthless desire to get to the bottom of things. From her tone, it seemed that she was very protective of him. Nodding, Han Shuo smiled faintly. "Don't worry, Dean, I'll definitely pay attention to your reminders. In addition, I'll report to the Dark Mantle as soon as possible." "Alright, that's all I have to say. As for your education and identity, there shouldn't be any problems tomorrow. With me watching over you, Dao won't do anything." Haha, actually Dao isn't a bad person. It's just that you made him lose face last time, that's why he's targeting you. I hope you don't take it to heart. Got it. Without saying anything else, Han Shuo left Emma's office. Han Shuo didn't pay too much attention to Dark Archmage Dao. If nothing unexpected happened, he wouldn't have many opportunities to come here after graduating from the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force. Naturally, he wouldn't have any contact with Dao. Of course, if Dao dared to court death, with the strength that Han Shuo possessed, he wouldn't mind sending him on his way. After leaving Emma's office, Han Shuo headed straight for Fanny's laboratory. Thinking that he would soon be able to see Fanny, Han Shuo's heart was in turmoil. He was so excited that he couldn't control himself. He was very nervous, like a young man in love who was about to reveal his true feelings. When he arrived in front of Fanny's door, Han Shuo took a deep breath and calmed the nervousness in his heart. He smiled and knocked. "Master Fanny, may I come in?" "You may not." Contrary to Han Shuo's expectations, Fanny directly refused Han Shuo after hearing Han Shuo's reply. This was something that had never happened before. Stunned, Han Shuo smiled wryly. "Why?" I know that nothing good will come of your visit this time. Therefore, you should just stand outside the door, or disappear for half a year like last time." There was obvious resentment in Fanny's voice from within the laboratory. Anyone could hear the meaning behind Fanny's words. She was still complaining about Han Shuo leaving without saying goodbye. "Master Fanny, listen to my explanation. I really didn't do it on purpose. I was delayed by matters in Valen City this time and had no choice but to stay here. I didn't mean to deceive you." With Han Shuo's current insight and experience, how could he not understand the meaning behind Fanny's words? He smiled wryly outside the laboratory and began to explain. Little pervert, I'll allow you to come in, but you're not allowed to touch me. Fanny hesitated for a moment, seeming to feel that it was a bit inappropriate to leave Han Shuo outside the door. Hastily nodding his head, Han Shuo made a solemn vow. Of course, of course. It would be even more inappropriate if someone saw me outside and spread some bad rumors. Fanny seemed to feel that Han Shuo's words made sense. The laboratory door creaked open and Fanny carefully peeked her head in, grabbing the dazed Han Shuo and slamming the door shut. She then returned to the table in the center and sat down. She said seriously, "All right, what do you want from me?" Chuckling evilly, Han Shuo walked rudely in front of Fanny and sat down. He then looked at Fanny with a smile. "Master Fanny, are you trying to renege on your debt?" With a straight face, Fanny forced herself to be calm as she flicked a glance at Han Shuo and asked in confusion, "What do I need to renege on? You once said that as long as I became an adept mage, you'd agree to be with me. Now that I've passed the adept mage test, I can be considered to have officially graduated from the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force. From now on, there are no more barriers between us because of our identities. So, shouldn't you honor your promise?" Han Shuo didn't try to hide anything as he looked at Fanny with a burning gaze and asked with a smile. After Han Shuo's words, Fanny could no longer maintain her pretense of being serious. She first glared fiercely at Han Shuo as a red blush spread across her cheeks. She then laughed tenderly and chuckled, having long since prepared herself. "I didn't say that I'd definitely agree to you, I only said that I'd consider it." "Heh, I haven't even thought about it yet, what are you in such a hurry for?" Fanny's current demeanor was charming and gorgeous, and the rosy blush on her cheeks added a bit of bashful beauty to her. After spending so much time with Fanny, Han Shuo had long since understood that it wasn't that Fanny didn't have any feelings for him. Now that Fanny's attitude was both welcoming and rejecting, it only made Han Shuo's heart itch even more. With a smirk, Han Shuo instantly forgot the agreement before he came in. His body suddenly moved, and he was already behind Fanny. His big hands wrapped around Fanny's shoulders from behind, and he leaned towards Fanny's cheeks to steal a kiss. He grinned and said, "Could it be that you really want to renege on your promise? This isn't the moral character that a good teacher should have, okay?" Fanny only felt her vision blur, and then she saw Han Shuo disappear in front of her. Before she could react, she found that Han Shuo had already appeared behind her like a ghost, and even clasped her arm that was sitting in the chair, taking the opportunity to sneak a kiss on her. "You audacious little pervert, what did you guarantee when you came in?" Fanny was greatly embarrassed. The resentment that she had accumulated in the past 6 months had not disappeared, and she couldn't help but struggle and shout. When dealing with a woman, the most important thing was not to follow her rhythm. You had to take the initiative and use both the mind and the body to attack and destroy the defenses in her heart. Han Shuo was no longer a virgin, and he had learned too much from Emily. In addition to the experiences from Clarendon's memories and Han Shuo's own feelings, he was no longer so passive when interacting with women. As Fanny struggled and shouted, Han Shuo's 2 hands were still firmly clasped around her body. He bent down, and his hot tongue lightly kissed Fanny's slender white neck. He softly whispered in Fanny's ear, "I've thought of you every day for the past 6 months. I wanted to see you every day, every night, every moment. I think you should know this, right? Really, the days when I'm not by your side are really boring. It's your promise that motivates me to train hard. The thought of being with you is like a curse, urging me to train day and night without slacking off. Today, I can advance to become an adept mage, all for the sake of being with you. Don't tell me you're heartless enough to hurt me." A series of low murmurs filled with sincerity and affection. The gentle voice was like a gentle breeze and drizzle, nourishing Fanny's withered heart. Han Shuo's hot tongue wandered wantonly, and it was more like a catalyst to destroy the defenses in Fanny's heart. It caused Fanny's struggling heart to slowly sink into the web of love that Han Shuo had woven. "Brian," Fanny murmured softly. Her eyes were already filled with tears at some point. Her originally struggling body went limp, and a sweet smile hung on her lips as she listened to Han Shua's passionate words of love. "You know, I really can't live without you." In the end, Han Shuo wrapped his arms around Fanny and pulled her up from the chair. He turned around Fanny's body and stared at her passionately, saying with deep affection and tenderness. The defenses in her heart completely collapsed. Fanny cried out involuntarily and suddenly threw herself into Han Shua's chest. Her two hands tightly wrapped around Han Shua's strong back. She stood on her tiptoes and planted her fragrant lips on Han Shua's big mouth. With a beauty throwing herself into his arms and her fragrant lips, Han Shua naturally wouldn't be polite. He immediately came into intimate contact with her and carried out a fiery French kiss. For Fanny, Han Shua truly adored her. From the moment he came to this world, he didn't know whether it was because of Brian's thoughts, or because of Fanny's kindness. In short, she did move Han Shua, causing Han Shua to be deeply infatuated with her, which had never changed. Even though there were earth-shaking changes later, even though Han Shua's strength soared all the way, and even though he owned Emily and Phoebe who were as beautiful as Fanny, his initial and most sincere infatuation with Fanny had never been affected. Now, Han Shua had already gotten used to everything in this world. He also understood that as long as he had enough strength, no matter what he wanted, it wouldn't be a difficult thing. Money, power, and beauties were indeed things that Han Shua liked, and they were things that he could never have in his previous life. If one could have everything to their heart's content while living in this world, then why bother with all those messy matters and what others thought of them? Since Han Shua had decided to indulge himself, then there was no need to be secretive. Chapter 249. Han Shua and Fanny embraced for a while, but Han Shua wasn't in a hurry to violate Fanny. Instead, he constantly expressed his true feelings with words of love. Only when Han Shua discovered that Fanny had completely let down her guard against him did he take out a pill from his space ring and hand it over to Fanny. He smiled and said, "Eat this." "What is this?" Fanny had a blissful smile on her face. Her bright eyes sparkled with curiosity as she looked at Han Shua and asked. The rebirth pill was round and translucent, emitting a delicate fragrance that gladdened the heart and refreshed the mind. It was like a brightly colored emerald pearl, refined by Han Shua in the cemetery of death. It had the effect of allowing an ordinary person to be reborn. There were only 7 rebirth pills in a cauldron. Han Shua had eaten one himself and was certain of its effects. This time, he planned to reforge Fanny's body and give her a pleasant surprise. "It's a great tonic," Han Shua said with a smile. "You always like to mystify people, you bad thing." Fanny rolled her eyes at Han Shua. She casually picked up the rebirth pill and popped it into her mouth without another word. Han Shua was startled when he saw Fanny swallow it so quickly. He then suddenly said, "Hurry and sit down, don't think about anything else." Exerting force with both hands, Han Shua pressed Fanny down onto the ground without any explanation. He then pressed both hands against the center of Fanny's back, the magical yuan already flowing into Fanny's body. "Oh, what did you give me to eat? Why does it feel like there's a ball of fire burning in my stomach?" Fanny was forced to sit on the ground by Han Shua. When she felt the rebirth pill enter her body, it was as if a ball of fire had been ignited. Her body temperature skyrocketed and she cried out in a panic. Then, Fanny seemed to have gotten the wrong idea. She couldn't help but shout angrily as she struggled, "Damn it, you didn't give me that kind of drug, did you? How can you be so despicable?" When Fanny's thoughts went astray, her heart was in chaos. She was both disappointed and resentful towards Han Shua. She began to struggle violently, wanting to break free from Han Shua's restraints. Han Shua turned pale with fright and immediately pressed his left hand on Fanny's shoulder, yelling urgently, "This isn't an aphrodisiac, I swear. Don't you trust me that much?" When these words were spoken, Fanny became a little more obedient. Only then did she feel that although her body was burning like a fire, there were indeed no thoughts of lust. With this, Fanny stopped struggling and hastily said, "You've always behaved poorly. That's why I misunderstood. I won't move now." Han Shua didn't know whether to laugh or cry after hearing her words. He immediately changed his mind and realized that he had indeed behaved a little improperly in the course of his relationship with Fanny. It was understandable that Fanny would speculate so maliciously about him. Alright, don't talk anymore. Just meditate, calm your mind and don't let your thoughts run wild. Han Shuo let go of the hand on Fanny's shoulder and placed it on her back. He sent magical yuan into Fanny's body and helped her dissolve the effects of the aphrodisiac in her body. Clouds of dense smoke curled around the two as streaks of black lightning flowed from Han Shuo's palm into Fanny's body. Fanny, who was sitting upright, let go of everything and allowed Han Shuo to do whatever he wanted. This time, she had given Han Shuo complete trust. An hour later, Han Shuo let go with a smile and breathed a sigh of relief. He whispered into Fanny's ear, "How do you feel?" I want to go to the toilet." Fanny was a little shy as she said softly with a red face. Laughing heartily, Han Shuo said, "That's right. You'll constantly want to go to the toilet in the next 3 days. The impurities in your body will all be expelled in these 3 days. After 3 days, your body will be beyond your imagination. I'll come see you again then." A series of crisp crackling sounds suddenly sounded from within Fanny's body. Fanny seemed to be unable to bear it as she hastily stood up with a red face and shouted angrily, "Why does this sound like a laxative? You're too hateful." Fanny didn't wait for Han Shuo to say anything and hurriedly left. She pulled open the door and walked out, not daring to stay a moment longer. It was obvious that she couldn't hold it in any longer. After Fanny left, Han Shuo couldn't stop chuckling oddly and left as well. He used the familiar winding path in the back of the mountain to avoid the necromancy students and walked out of the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force. Han Shuo's actions must have caused a stir after he returned today. After completing the procedures in 3 days, Han Shuo would no longer be considered a member of the academy. In order to prevent Lisa's group of students from chattering incessantly, it was more appropriate to leave through the back door. Han Shuo didn't immediately report to the Dark Mantle after leaving the academy. He hadn't returned for a long time anyways and was in no hurry to return in a day or two. Many carriages were currently parked in front of the Buzzed Merchant Guild's entrance. It looked quite lively. Han Shuo walked straight inside after he arrived. "Isn't this Mr. Brian? Why you here?" The two guards at the entrance both recognized Han Shuo. When they saw Han Shuo appear after not seeing him for a long time, one of them greeted him in surprise. "Yes, I haven't been here for a long time. Has your young miss returned?" Han Shuo nodded with a faint smile and asked in a friendly manner. "She returned very early. If Mr. Brian is here to do business with the young miss this time, why don't you come again next time?" The guard had a pained expression as he hesitated for a moment and opened his mouth to speak. "Oh, what's going on? Is your young miss not home?" Han Shuo asked in confusion and then chuckled softly, "No matter, I can go look for Fabian. Even if Fabian isn't here, I can still chat with Jack." Suddenly, Phoebe's angry rebuke sounded from inside. Han Shuo blanked for a moment before his face darkened. "Just what is going on?" The guard smiled wryly as he looked at Han Shuo and said kindly, "It's a bit chaotic inside. That merchant called Cameron seems to want Miss Phoebe to agree to something, but the young miss hasn't agreed. Things don't seem to be going well." "Thank you for your reminder. It looks like you don't know about my relationship with your guild." Han Shuo responded and hurriedly walked inside, intending to see what was going on. Last time at Lawrence's residence, that merchant called Cameron seemed to have wanted Phoebe to join their merchant alliance, but had been rejected by Phoebe. Who would have thought that after so long, this Cameron still hadn't given up on that idea? Judging from Phoebe's angry voice, the situation inside must not be too pleasant right now. No matter what, Phoebe was now Han Shuo's woman. Now that she seemed to be being bullied, Han Shuo naturally couldn't sit idly by. Therefore, with a darkened face, Han Shuo had already appeared at the place where Phoebe's angry voice had come from in the span of a few breaths. The group of 10 or so people were at the pavilion that Phoebe often stayed in. The crack in the fake mountain that Han Shuo and Phoebe had squeezed through was still so familiar, but now there were a few unfamiliar faces, brimming with hostility. Cameron, whom they'd seen last time at the residence of Finance Minister Evie, and a few other unfamiliar faces. These people were either richly dressed merchants or highly skilled mages and swordsmen. All of them had unfriendly expressions on their faces as they looked at Phoebe, Fabian, and the others, as if they were ready to fight at the slightest disagreement. In the surroundings were a few guards of the Buzzed Merchant Guild. Each and every one of them was filled with indignation, and the weapons in their hands had already been unsheathed. It seemed that as long as Phoebe gave the order, they would immediately fight to the death with them. "Brian, when did you return?" Phoebe's beautiful eyes suddenly lit up as she looked at Han Shuo, wild with joy, and exclaimed in surprise. "He's just a pretty boy, what use is he?" A burly fellow, whose badge on his chest clearly indicated that he was a senior swordsman, flicked a disdainful glance at Han Shuo and shouted coldly. It looked like he knew a bit about Han Shuo and Phoebe. "Oh, is that so?" Han Shuo laughed oddly and then mocked. "Then, why don't you take a punch from this pretty boy?" Han Shuo, who had long since been in a bad mood, threw out a punch as soon as he'd finished speaking. There were no ripples of fighting aura, nor did there seem to be any frightening momentum. Even the speed of the punch was neither fast nor slow, and it looked soft and powerless. Unsurprisingly, the senior swordsman still had a look of disdain on his face as he said coldly, "A pretty boy, all right. Even the punch you threw out is so soft and powerless." The man then raised his hand and a sinister smile appeared at the corners of his mouth as he threw a punch at Han Shuo's incoming punch. It looked like he intended to seriously injure Han Shuo with one punch and intimidate the surrounding Buzzed Merchant Guild guards. The merchants who'd come with Cameron all wore relaxed smiles on their faces. They stared at Han Shuo as if they were waiting to see him make a fool of himself, as if Han Shuo would definitely be injured. On the other hand, on Phoebe's side, Fabian had an excited expression. Having seen Han Shuo's methods, Fabian had reason to believe that this punch would be very interesting. Phoebe, on the other hand, had an icy expression on her face as the corners of her mouth hooked up in a vicious arc. A crisp crack rang out as the senior swordsman with the sinister smile on his face, the bones in his right hand, which had collided with Han Shuo's fist, made a series of disorderly sounds as he screamed like ghosts and howled like wolves. His valiant body stumbled backwards from the strong impact. When he landed on his butt, large mouthfuls of fresh blood flowed uncontrollably from his mouth. Even his shrill cries were muffled by the blood as he looked at Han Shuo in terror and howled miserably. Chapter 250. Han Shuo's fist contained the terrifying explosive power of magical energy. Not only did the blood vessels and tendons of the senior swordsman who had previously ridiculed him explode, even his bones cracked. From now on, this person's right arm could be said to be ruined. Han Shuo grinned mischievously as he callously said, "If you dare to have a foul mouth again, then leave your life here today." The senior swordsman's mouth uncontrollably overflowed with blood. He looked at Han Shuo with extreme fright and couldn't utter a complete sentence. He was obviously intimidated by Han Shuo. Beside Cameron was a space archmage with a sinister appearance. He wore a brown magic robe and had many pockmarks on his face. His eyes flickered as he looked at Cameron. Cameron, whose aura had been obstructed, nodded slightly, seeming to agree with this space archmage's suggestion. This space archmage with a face full of pockmarks was the strongest among those who had come with Cameron. When he saw Cameron nod his head, he coldly twitched his mouth and then quickly chanted a magic incantation. Suddenly, the entire space rippled like waves in the water. Fierce magic elements filled the entire space in an instant, and a mysterious binding force followed. The space seemed to have been imprisoned, and everyone couldn't move their limbs. Soon after, the sinister space archmage chanted another magic incantation. The entire flat space was like a piece of glass that had been cut by a blade. With Cameron at the center, the invaders were completely separated from the confined space after a few flashes of white light. Refusing a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit. "You're courting death." The space archmage's voice was like a sharp weapon rubbing against glass, ear-piercing and numbing. He coldly looked at Han Shuo's group as he spoke. "Mr. Aubrey, Your skills are indeed marvelous. After Cameron's space was cut out, Cameron's group recovered from their confined state. Cameron laughed heartily as he spoke. No need to be polite. I was only acting according to Duke Ashburn's orders. The space archmage called Aubrey was just as proud of Cameron's flattery as he yelled with a straight face. This kid named Brian was once involved with the Betteridge family's Han at the Empire's finance minister's banquet. Wouldn't it be a bit bad if we also captured him? Cameron pointed at Han Shura and said to Aubrey with some hesitation. Raising his head with a sneer, Aubrey disdainfully glanced at Han Shura and said, "What can this brat do? Do you think our Duke Ashburn is afraid of that old fellow, Han?" With a smile on his face, Cameron flattered, That's right. Since that's the case, let's capture all of them and release them after I've taken over the Buzzed Merchant Guild. Yes, this matter must be done quickly. His Excellency the Duke is getting impatient. Within a short period of time, all the large merchant guilds in the Empire must be in your hands. If the small merchant guilds without any foundation dare to disobey, just kill them all. We can't wait. Aubrey's nose was in the air, seemingly disgusted with these merchants as he coldly instructed. Understood. How could I dare not do my best when working for His Excellency the Duke? Cameron vowed solemnly with a face full of loyalty. Nodding his head, Aubrey said, All right, no more nonsense. I'll tie them up one by one and make it convenient for you to bring them out of the Buzzed Merchant Guild. It'll be convenient for you to bring them out of this Buzzed Merchant Guild. Just imprison this woman called Phoebe. Don't have any other ideas. Otherwise, if you anger her master, you'll be the one to suffer in the end. How could Cameron dare to say no? He repeatedly nodded his head to express his understanding. He looked at Phoebe with a somewhat astonished gaze, seemingly not understanding the origin of Phoebe's master. Even Duke Ashburn, who held great power in the Empire, had to be apprehensive of this person's existence. Aubrey took a deep breath and shook his left hand that was hidden in his sleeve. His space ring faintly lit up and a blue jade magic staff appeared in his left hand. He opened his mouth, intending to chant a magic incantation. At this moment, the space with Han Shua at the center suddenly exploded. A faint, cold light snaked past like lightning. The stiff bodies of Phoebe and the others who were imprisoned behind Han Shua all loosened. When the faint, cold light circled around his body and returned to his palm, a cold, fierce aura suddenly overflowed from Han Shua's body. Han Shua's expression was calm and unruffled. He stared at Archmage Aubrey and opened his mouth to ask Phoebe, Phoebe, what should we do with these people? How is this possible? Just who are you? How could you break my imprisonment space? Aubrey's expression was terrified. He didn't dare to accept this reality and shouted loudly. He gripped the magic staff in his left hand tightly, preparing to attack again at any time. Cameron and the other merchants were also shocked. They loudly yelled for their guards to protect them. Each and every one of them shrank within their guards and looked at Han Shua with some fear. To be able to break a space archmage's imprisonment space, this kind of strength was definitely not something that the guards beside them could deal with. They deeply understood this, so they were on edge and on guard. Phoebe's expression was a bit unsightly. She hatefully glared at Cameron and the others before letting out a dejected sigh and said, Let them go. Han Shua stared blankly. The other party had already bullied them, but Phoebe actually swallowed the insult. This didn't seem to be in line with Phoebe's character. Then he thought of the name Duke Ashburn and faintly understood something. A wave of anger overflowed from his heart. Han Shua shouted with a cold expression, Are we going to let them off so easily? Let them go. Phoebe's voice was a bit powerless as she sighed softly. What can you do? Duke Ashburn's power is monstrous in the Empire. How can you little merchants go against him? Aubrey was extremely pleased with himself. He laughed wildly as he walked towards the door. A person who could break a space archmage's imprisonment space definitely wasn't weaker than a spellcaster. With Han Shua here who could go toe-to-toe with him, and Phoebe who he knew of, Aubrey knew that it was impossible to successfully complete the mission this time. Naturally, he wasn't willing to continue staying here. Cameron and the others naturally didn't dare to linger when they saw Aubrey walk out. They turned around without the slightest hesitation, glanced fearfully at the murderous Han Shuo, and followed Aubrey out with trepidation. Halt! Suddenly, Han Shuo roared. His entire body was shrouded in a vicious aura. A cold and cruel aura surged out like a breached dam. The extremely evil and cruel aura rushed towards the group of people who were planning to leave. Under this terrifying aura, even Aubrey's forehead was drenched in cold sweat. His body stiffened as he stood there, not daring to move. As for the merchants like Cameron, their bodies were shivering. Their backs were already drenched in sweat, as if they had been drenched in rain. Han Shuo was like a vicious beast that could go berserk at any time. He was staring at them with bloodthirsty eyes. Perhaps if they were careless, they would be torn to shreds. Brian, this is the Buzzed Merchant Guild. I beg of you. Phoebe was shocked. After 4 months, Han Shuo's strength had obviously skyrocketed. The terrifying aura emanating from his body now made Phoebe both happy and shocked. She was happy that Han Shuo's strength had greatly increased, so her own safety would be more guaranteed in the future. She was shocked that she couldn't predict Han Shuo's temperament. He now had the strength to heavily injure this group of merchants. If he really disregarded everything and made a move, it was very likely that it would bring disaster to the Buzzed Merchant Guild. Therefore, she was half happy and half worried as she hurriedly begged. Taking a deep breath, Han Shuo understood Phoebe's meaning from the 5 words that Phoebe had deliberately emphasized: Buzzed Merchant Guild. No matter what, making a move in such a place would bring great trouble to Phoebe. This was also the capital of the empire. Most of the time, it wasn't something that could be solved with blind slaughter. With a sway of his body, Han Shuo had already appeared behind Aubrey. He reached out his hand and patted Aubrey's shoulder, saying coldly, "Aubrey, was it? I'll remember you. Please remember me too. Anyone who dares to make a move against me will pay the price sooner or later." As Han Shuo spoke, the hand that had patted Aubrey's shoulder emitted 2 faint red and purple lights from the middle and index fingers of Han Shuo's hand. Under the cover of his palm, they entered Aubrey's body. At this moment, Aubrey was scared out of his wits. When Han Shuo had yelled, "Stop," he had already prepared to make a move at any time. However, Han Shuo's ghostly speed had completely destroyed his defenses. Before he could even react, Han Shuo had appeared behind him out of thin air, and then he felt Han Shuo's large hand land on his shoulder. Even an archmage would have no chance of winning against a fellow with such terrifying destructive power. Therefore, Aubrey's aura stopped and he didn't say a single word. He just stood there obediently, listening to Han Shuo's icy threats and feeling the frightening murderous intent when Han Shuo patted his shoulder. It was precisely because of this nervousness that he was on tenterhooks that he didn't calm down and sense anything out of the ordinary. When the 2 auras, one cold and one hot, concealed themselves in his body, he didn't notice them at all. "All right, you damned bastards, now get the hell out of here." After planting the poison of ice and fire in Aubrey's body, Han Shuo walked towards Phoebe with a callous expression. When he arrived at Cameron's side, he casually patted the frightened Cameron. A purple light flashed, and Han Shuo indifferently said, "You be careful too." Then, Han Shuo stood at Phoebe's side, withdrawing the murderous aura that seemed to have materialized from his body. Aubrey and the others didn't dare to say another word and hurriedly left in a panic. After taking a trip to the gates of hell, these people had a deep fear of Han Shuo in their hearts. After these people left, Phoebe looked at Han Shuo apologetically and said somewhat timidly, "I'm sorry, these people were following Duke Ashburn's orders. If something happened to them in our guild, it would be very difficult to handle." Nodding with a smile, Han Shuo didn't seem to have the murderous aura from before and had recovered his usual indifference. He said, "Don't worry, nothing will happen to them in the Buzzed Merchant Guild. However, I guarantee that they won't have it easy." Phoebe stared blankly for a moment before crying out in alarm, "You want to assassinate them?" With today's unforeseen event, if they were assassinated not long after returning, everyone would know that it was us who did it. This isn't a good idea. The corners of his mouth hooked into a secretive smile as Han Shuo comforted, "Don't worry, am I such a person who can't see the big picture? All of you can leave first, I have some things to discuss with Brian alone. Phoebe looked at the surrounding guards, as well as Fabian and a few other trusted aides of the Merchant Guild, and ordered with a somewhat distressed expression. After experiencing the unforeseen event earlier, the guards and trusted aides of the Merchant Guild seemed to have once again recognized the relationship between the two of them. Under Phoebe's orders, they didn't say anything more and dispersed in different directions, disappearing from the pavilion not long after. What exactly happened? After those people left, Han Shuo asked in a soft voice. Seeing that there was no one around, Phoebe threw herself into Han Shuo's arms and used all her strength to hug Han Shuo tightly. She then murmured softly, "It's so good to have you by my side." Afterwards, the two of them held each other tightly as they briefly described their encounters after they'd separated in the Valley of Sunshine. They had a general understanding of each other's whereabouts during this period of time. Han Shuo also understood from Phoebe that because he and Phoebe had stayed in the Valley of Sunshine for a period of time, the Buzzed Merchant Guild had no one to rely on and had been taken over by a group of merchants led by Cameron. "Alright, I know what I'm doing now." Han Shuo patted Phoebe's shoulder and comforted her as he took out a rebirth pill and handed it to Phoebe. "Eat this." In order to prevent a repeat of last time's encounter, Han Shuo briefly explained some of the effects of the pill to prevent her from mistaking it for an aphrodisiac or laxative like Fanny. When Phoebe rolled her eyes at Han Shuo and ate the rebirth pill, Han Shuo also helped Phoebe refine the pill's effects. He left the Buzzed Merchant Guild to report to the Dark Mantle as Phoebe hurriedly looked for the toilet. Welcome to Immortal Cultivation Audiobooks, your gateway to the mystical world of Xianxia. Dive into legendary tales of martial arts, spiritual growth, and immortal ascension. Here, we bring you full-length English audiobooks of the best Wuxia and Xianxia stories, from young prodigies to ancient sect wars. Perfect for fans of Against the Gods, Martial World, and tales of demons and gods.